The sound of Marco's laughter still echoes in my ears. Not the warm, loving laugh I fell in love with 15 years ago in Barcelona, but a cold, mocking sound that cut through the quiet courtroom like a knife. He was sitting across from me at that polished wooden table, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his gold watch catching the light as he signed paper after paper with a confident flourish. "This is almost too easy, Isabella," he whispered to his lawyer, but loud enough for me to hear. "She actually thinks she's getting something out of this." I watched him scribble his signature on the divorce papers, that same arrogant smile spreading across his face that I'd seen so many times before. The smile that said he knew something I didn't. The smile that had haunted me for months as our marriage crumbled around us. Judge Rodriguez adjusted his glasses and picked up a thick folder. "Before we finalize these proceedings," he said in his deep, measured voice, "I need to review the financial disclosures one more time." Marco leaned back in his chair, practically glowing with confidence. He shot me a look that was pure triumph. After all, he had that prenuptial agreement, the one he'd convinced me to sign when I was young and naive, and so desperately in love that I would have signed anything he put in front of me. "Mrs. Herrera," the judge continued, using my maiden name as I'd requested, "your current bank balance shows." And that's when Marco's laughter stopped. That's when his face went from smug confidence to complete shock. That's when everything he thought he knew about our divorce, about me, came crashing down around him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all began. Back to when Marco and I were just two kids from Madrid who thought we could conquer the world together. My name is Isabella Herrera, and 15 years ago I was a 24-year-old business student working part-time at a small cafe in the heart of Madrid. I had dreams of opening my own restaurant someday, but those dreams felt impossibly far away on my tiny salary. I was studying business administration at night and working every day, barely making ends meet in my cramped studio apartment. That's when Marco Valdez walked into my life. He was everything I wasn't: confident, charming, and already successful at just 26. He owned a small import business that brought Spanish olive oil and wine to restaurants across Europe. When he first came into the cafe, ordering his cortado with that dazzling smile, I thought he was just another customer. But he kept coming back, day after day, always finding reasons to chat with me. "You have good business instincts," he told me one afternoon, watching me handle the busy lunch rush. "The way you organize everything, how you remember every customer's order, you're wasted here." I felt my cheeks burn with pride. No one had ever told me I was good at business before. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. Marco would pick me up after my classes, take me to fancy restaurants I could never afford, and tell me stories about his business adventures. He made me feel special, like I was part of something bigger than myself. "Come work with me," he said one evening as we walked along the Retiro Park. "I need someone I can trust, someone smart like you to help me grow the business." I was hesitant at first, but I'm still in school, Marco. I don't know anything about importing or... "I'll teach you everything," he interrupted, taking my hands in his. "We'll build something amazing together, Isabella. Just you and me." How could I say no to that? How could I say no to him? So I dropped out of school, something I would regret for years to come, and threw myself into Marco's world. And oh, what a world it was. The business was much smaller than Marco had made it seem. He operated out of a tiny office above a bakery with just one part-time employee who handled deliveries. But Marco had big dreams, and somehow he made me believe in them too. "We're going to expand," he told me on my first day, spreading maps across his cluttered desk. "France, Italy, maybe even Germany. But first, we need to get organized." That became my job, getting organized. While Marco handled the big picture stuff, meeting with suppliers and potential clients, I dove into the details. I learned about import regulations, shipping schedules, and customer service. I reorganized his chaotic filing system, created proper invoices, and started tracking expenses properly for the first time. "You're incredible," Marco would say, watching me work late into the evening. "I don't know how I manage without you." Those words meant everything to me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly valued. Within a year, the business was thriving. My organizational skills had streamlined everything, and I'd started reaching out to new restaurants and specialty food stores. We landed 3 major contracts with restaurant chains in Paris, and suddenly, Marco's little import business wasn't so little anymore. "We should celebrate," Marco said one evening, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Isabella, will you marry me?" I said yes before he even finished asking. How could I not? We were partners in everything, business and life. We were building something beautiful together. The wedding was small but perfect, held in Marco's family's vineyard outside Madrid. I wore my grandmother's dress, and Marco looked so handsome in his navy suit. All our friends and family were there, toasting our future and the success of our business. But then came the prenup. "It's just a formality," Marco explained the week before our wedding, sliding the papers across the kitchen table of our shared apartment. "My lawyer says it's smart to have one, especially with the business growing so fast." I stared at the dense legal text, trying to make sense of it. "I don't understand half of these words, Marco." "That's okay," he said, his hand warm on my shoulder. "The basic idea is that if anything ever happens to us, which it won't, we each keep what we brought into the marriage. The business stays mine since I started it before we met, and your personal stuff stays yours." "But I've been working on the business for 2 years now," I said quietly. "Doesn't that count for something?" Marco's smile tightened just slightly. "Of course it counts, mi amor. But technically, the business existed before you joined. This is just protecting what we each built separately, you know?" I wanted to argue to point out that the business had grown from practically nothing to a thriving company largely because of my work. But Marco was already stressed about the wedding preparations, and I didn't want to cause problems. Besides, divorce was the last thing on my mind. We were in love, we were partners, we were going to be together forever. So I signed it. Just like that, with barely a second thought, I signed away any legal claim to the business I'd helped build. The years that followed were the best of my life. The business exploded with growth, expanding into 6 countries and employing over 30 people. Marco handled the big contracts and supplier relationships, while I managed everything else: finances, employee scheduling, customer service, quality control. I worked 16-hour days and loved every minute of it. "We make a perfect team," Marco would say, and I believed him completely. We bought a beautiful house in the suburbs of Madrid, with a garden where I could grow my own herbs and vegetables. Marco insisted on putting only his name on the deed. "It's easier for taxes," he explained, "since the business income is all in my name anyway." I didn't question it. Why would I? We were married, we were partners, we were building our future together. When the business expanded into South America, I was the one who researched the markets, learned about the regulations, and established relationships with new suppliers. When we started our online store, I designed the website and managed all the digital marketing. When we needed to secure a major loan for expansion, I prepared all the financial documents and presentations. But officially on paper, I was just Marco's wife. My name wasn't on the business registration, not on the bank accounts, not on any of the contracts or legal documents. Marco always handled that side of things, and I trusted him completely. "You're the heart of this company," he'd tell me whenever I brought up making my role more official. "Everyone knows how important you are. The paperwork doesn't matter." And I believed him. God help me, I believed him. For 10 years, I poured my heart, my soul, and my intelligence into building what I thought was our shared dream. I sacrificed my own education, my own career ambitions, my own independence, all for the sake of our partnership. I should have seen the warning signs. I should have noticed when Marco started working late more often, when he became secretive about his phone calls, when he started taking business trips without me. I should have realized something was wrong when he began dismissing my ideas and contributions more frequently. "Maybe you should focus more on the home side of things," he suggested one evening as I was reviewing quarterly reports. "The business is getting complex and you never finished your degree." The words stung, but I pushed the hurt aside. Marco was under a lot of pressure, and maybe he was right. Maybe I was getting in over my head, but then came the night that changed everything. I was working late in the office trying to reconcile some discrepancies in our shipping costs when I heard voices coming from Marco's private office. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear Marco talking to someone on the phone. She has no idea, he was saying, his voice low and almost cruel. The prenup covers everything. Even if she tries to claim she helped build the business, she can't prove anything. Her name isn't on any of the important documents. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. 15 years of free labor, Marco continued with a laugh. She's been incredibly useful, I'll give her that. But legally, she owns nothing. When this is over, she'll be left with whatever pocket change she had when we met. The person on the other end said something I couldn't hear, and Marco laughed again. That same cold, mocking laugh that would haunt me in the courtroom months later. Trust me, he said, Isabella is going to get exactly what she deserves. Nothing. I stood there in the darkness, my whole world crumbling around me. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of partnership, 15 years of building something together. And this was what Marco really thought of me. A useful tool that he could discard when he was done with me. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later. Marco didn't even have the decency to tell me himself. I found them on our kitchen counter when I came home from grocery shopping, right next to a note that said he'd moved out and that his lawyer would be in touch. I think we both know this marriage has run its course, the note read in his neat handwriting. I'm sure we can handle this like adults. Like adults, as if he hadn't just destroyed my entire life with a casual note left on the kitchen counter. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. Marco's lawyer made it clear that I had no claim to the business or any of our major assets. The prenup was ironclad, they said. I was entitled to half of our savings account, which contained exactly 3,000 euros, and whatever personal belongings I could prove I'd brought into the marriage. Mrs. Valdez, Marco's lawyer said during one particularly humiliating meeting, you must understand that your husband built this business from nothing. While your contributions were certainly appreciated, they don't constitute legal ownership. Contributions, as if 15 years of my life were just contributions. I felt lost, defeated, and completely alone. Marco had been my whole world for so long that I didn't even know who I was without him. I'd given up my education, my career prospects, my independence, everything for what I thought was our shared future. But then I met Carmen Rodriguez. Carmen was a family lawyer who specialized in complex divorce cases, and she came highly recommended by a friend of a friend. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that put me at ease immediately. Tell me everything, she said during our first meeting, pushing a box of tissues across her desk. And I mean everything. Every detail about the business, every conversation, every document you remember. So I told her. I told her about dropping out of school to work with Marco, about the years of building the business together, about the prenup I'd signed without really understanding it. I told her about the late nights, the expansion plans, the customer relationships I'd built, the financial systems I'd created. Carmen listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. Isabella, she said finally, I need to ask you something very important. Do you have any proof of your work on the business? Any emails, documents, photographs, anything that shows your involvement? I thought about it, and slowly a spark of hope began to form in my chest. I kept copies of everything. Financial reports, email correspondence, even photos from business events and meetings. I have boxes of it at home. Carmen's eyes lit up. Bring me everything. Every single piece of paper, every email, every photo. We're going to tell your side of this story. Over the next few weeks, Carmen and I went through 15 years of documents. What we found was a detailed record of my integral role in building the business that Marco was trying to claim as his own. Email threads showing me negotiating with suppliers, financial reports in my handwriting, customer testimonials praising my service, photos of me at business conferences, trade shows, and client meetings, a paper trail that painted a very different picture than the one Marco was presenting. This is good, Carmen said, her voice growing more confident with each piece of evidence. This is very good, but we need more. We need to prove that you weren't just an employee, you were a partner. That's when we discovered the first crack in Marco's armor. The prenuptial agreement that I'd signed 15 years ago, the one that Marco's lawyer claimed was ironclad. had never been properly notarized. In Spain, prenuptial agreements must be notarized and filed with the civil registry to be legally binding. Marco had been so confident in his control over the situation that he'd never bothered to complete the legal requirements. His lawyer made a mistake, Carmen explained, barely containing her excitement. Without proper notarization and filing, this prenup isn't worth the paper it's printed on. But that was just the beginning. As we dug deeper, we uncovered more irregularities. The witness signatures on the prenup were from Marco's business associates, people who had a vested interest in the business staying in his name. According to Spanish law, prenup witnesses must be independent parties. "Isabella," Carmen said one afternoon, her voice serious, "I need you to understand something. What we're about to do in court isn't just about the money or the business. This is about justice. This is about recognizing your worth and your contributions. Are you ready for that fight?" I thought about the 15 years I'd given to Marco, the dreams I'd sacrificed, the woman I'd been before I met him. I thought about his cruel laughter on that phone call, his dismissive attitude, his assumption that I was just a useful tool he could discard. "I'm ready," I said, and for the first time in months, I meant it. The day of the hearing arrived gray and rainy, matching my mood perfectly. I sat in the courtroom wearing my best dress, a simple black one that I'd bought with my own money from our meager savings account. Across from me, Marco sat in his expensive suit, radiating confidence and superiority. He barely looked at me as we waited for the judge to arrive. When he did glance in my direction, it was with that same dismissive look I'd grown to hate, like I was nothing, like I'd never been anything. Judge Rodriguez entered the courtroom with quiet authority. He was an older man with silver hair and intelligent eyes who'd been handling family law cases for over 20 years. Carmen had told me he was fair but thorough, someone who wouldn't be swayed by charm or intimidation. "We're here today to finalize the divorce between Marco Valdez and Isabella Herrera," he began, his voice carrying easily through the small courtroom. "I've reviewed the preliminary documents, and I have some questions before we proceed." Marco's lawyer stood up, his confidence obvious. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case. Mr. Valdez built his import business prior to the marriage, and there's a valid prenuptial agreement that clearly outlines the division of assets." Judge Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And Mrs. Herrera, you're represented by Carmen Rodriguez, correct?" Carmen stood gracefully. "Yes, Your Honor. And we have significant evidence to present regarding both the validity of the prenuptial agreement and Mrs. Herrera's integral role in building the business in question." I saw Marco's confident smile falter just slightly. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but Marco shook his head dismissively. He was still so sure of himself, so convinced that his plan was foolproof. "Very well," Judge Rodriguez said. "Let's begin with the prenuptial agreement." Marco's lawyer presented their case first, explaining how the prenup clearly protected the business that Marco had established before our marriage. He spoke confidently about the agreement's terms, about how it had been signed voluntarily by both parties, about how it represented a fair division of premarital assets. "The document is clear and legally binding," he concluded. "Mrs. Herrera was aware of its terms when she signed it, and it should be upheld in full." Then it was Carmen's turn. She approached the bench with a stack of documents and that same calm confidence that had impressed me from our first meeting. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that calls into question both the validity of this prenuptial agreement and the assumptions it's based on." What happened next was like watching a master craftsman at work. Carmen systematically dismantled every aspect of Marco's case, piece by piece. First, she presented evidence that the prenup had never been properly notarized or filed with the civil registry. She showed the judge the irregular witness signatures, the missing legal requirements, the procedural errors that invalidated the entire document. According to Spanish family law, Carmen explained, this agreement fails to meet the basic legal requirements for a valid prenuptial contract. I watched Marco's face grow pale as the implications sank in. His lawyer was frantically shuffling through papers, clearly caught off guard by this revelation. But Carmen wasn't finished. She then presented 15 years of documentation showing my integral role in building the business. Email threads, financial reports, customer testimonials, photographs from business events. a comprehensive record of my contributions that painted a very different picture than the one Marco had been presenting. Mrs. Herrera wasn't just an employee or a helpful spouse, Carmen argued. She was a full partner in building this business from a small operation into a multi-million-euro enterprise. The evidence shows her involvement in every major decision, every expansion, every significant development. She called witnesses, former employees who testified about my role in the company, customers who confirmed my involvement in their business relationships, even Marco's own accountant who admitted that my financial management had been crucial to the business's success. Without Mrs. Herrera's organizational skills, customer service excellence, and financial acumen, the accountant testified, the business would never have achieved its current success. I watched Marco's confidence crumble as witness after witness confirmed my central role in building what he'd claimed was his sole achievement. His lawyer tried to object, tried to minimize the testimony, but the evidence was overwhelming. Then Carmen presented the most damaging piece of evidence of all. "Your Honor," she said, approaching the bench with a small recording device, "I have a recording that Mrs. Herrera made of a conversation she overheard between her husband and his business associate. I believe it reveals Mr. Valdez's true intentions regarding this divorce." Marco's eyes went wide with shock. He clearly had no idea that I'd recorded that devastating phone call where he'd laughed about getting 15 years of free labor from me. Carmen played the recording for the court. Marco's cruel laughter filled the courtroom, along with his dismissive comments about my contributions and his confidence that I would get exactly what I deserved, nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Marco's lawyer looked stunned by the callousness of his client's words. "This recording," Carmen continued, "demonstrates that Mr. Valdez has systematically undervalued and dismissed his wife's contributions while knowingly benefiting from her labor. It also shows his deliberate intention to use legal technicalities to deny her fair compensation for her role in building their shared business." Judge Rodriguez had been taking notes throughout the proceedings, his expression growing more serious with each piece of evidence. When Carmen finished her presentation, he looked directly at Marco for a long moment. "Mr. Valdez," he said quietly, "do you have anything to say in response to this evidence?" Marco's lawyer tried to salvage the situation, arguing that the prenup should still be partially valid, that the business had existed before the marriage, that my contributions were those of a supportive spouse rather than a business partner. But it was too late. The damage was done. The evidence was overwhelming, and Marco's own words had revealed his true character. Judge Rodriguez called for a recess to review all the evidence and legal precedents. As we waited in the hallway, I could hear Marco arguing frantically with his lawyer, his voice rising with desperation. "This can't be happening," he kept saying. "The prenup was supposed to protect everything. She can't just take half of everything I built." Carmen put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Isabella," she said quietly, "I want you to prepare yourself. Based on the evidence we've presented in the invalid prenup, you may be entitled to much more than half of the marital assets." When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Rodriguez had made his decision. But before he announced it, he wanted to review the financial disclosures one more time. That's when we get back to where I started this story. Marco signing the divorce papers with that confident laugh, so sure that he was about to walk away with everything, while I got nothing. "Before we finalize these proceedings," Judge Rodriguez said, adjusting his glasses, "I need to review the financial disclosures one more time." Marco leaned back in his chair, that triumphant smile spreading across his face. He shot me a look of pure superiority, probably thinking about how he'd outsmarted me, how he'd gotten 15 years of free labor and was about to walk away scot-free. "Mrs. Herrera," the judge continued, "your current bank balance shows..." And that's when everything changed. That's when Marco's laughter stopped dead. That's when his face went from smug confidence to complete shock. Because what Judge Rodriguez was about to reveal would turn this entire divorce on its head, and Marco's carefully constructed plan was about to become his worst nightmare. To be continued. "Mrs. Herrera," Judge Rodriguez continued, his voice cutting through the tense silence of the courtroom, "your current bank balance shows 847,000 euros. The words hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Marco's pen slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the wooden table. His mouth fell open, and for the first time in 15 years, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. That's impossible, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. She doesn't have access to that kind of money. I control all the business accounts. Judge Rodriguez raised an eyebrow and continued reading from the financial disclosure. According to the banking records submitted by Mrs. Herrera's legal counsel, this account was opened 18 months ago and has been steadily growing through what appears to be consulting fees and business income. Marco's lawyer was frantically shuffling through papers, clearly as shocked as his client. Your Honor, we weren't made aware of any separate business ventures or... That's because you never asked, Carmen interrupted smoothly, standing up with a confident smile. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence of Mrs. Herrera's independent business activities over the past 2 years. I watched Marco's face cycle through confusion, anger, and growing panic. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when he would realize that while he'd been planning to discard me like a used tool, I'd been quietly building something of my own. You see, there was something I hadn't told anyone, not even Carmen, until recently. Something that would change everything about this divorce and show Marco exactly what kind of woman he'd underestimated. It started 2 years ago, during one of Marco's extended business trips to Argentina. He'd been gone for 3 weeks, and I was handling all the day-to-day operations of the company as usual. That's when I received an unexpected phone call from Sofia Morales, the owner of a small organic food company in Barcelona. Mrs. Valdez, Sofia had said, her voice nervous but determined, I know this is unusual, but I need your help. I've been watching how you've grown your husband's business, and I'm desperate. My company is struggling, and I don't know what to do. I was hesitant at first. I'm not sure I can help you, Sofia. I work for my husband's company and... Please, she interrupted. I've seen your work at the trade shows. You have a gift for organization, for understanding what customers want. I can pay you for consulting work, just a few hours a week. I'm willing to try anything. Something in her voice reminded me of myself 15 years ago. Young, desperate, and full of dreams that seemed impossible to reach. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet with her. Sofia's company was exactly what I'd expected. Chaotic, disorganized, and bleeding money despite having excellent products. But I could see the potential immediately. Within hours of reviewing her operations, I'd identified a dozen ways to improve efficiency and reduce costs. You need to restructure your supply chain, I told her, spreading her financial records across her kitchen table. And your marketing is all wrong. You're targeting the wrong customers through the wrong channels. I spent the next few weekends helping Sofia reorganize her business. I created proper financial tracking systems, developed a new marketing strategy, and helped her negotiate better deals with suppliers. Within 6 months, her company had tripled its profits. Isabella, you're a miracle worker, Sofia said one evening as we celebrated her first major contract with a restaurant chain. How did you learn all this? 15 years of practice, I replied, though I was starting to realize that maybe I'd learned more than I'd given myself credit for. Word spread quickly through Barcelona's small business community. Soon I was getting calls from other struggling companies, a boutique clothing store, a small bakery, a family-owned restaurant. They all wanted the same thing, help turning their dreams into profitable businesses. I started charging for my services, at first just enough to cover my travel expenses, but as my reputation grew, so did my rates. I was working evenings and weekends, using skills I'd developed during my 15 years with Marco to help other people build their own success. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Marco dismissed my contributions to his business as mere help, other entrepreneurs were paying me substantial fees for the exact same skills. You should make this official, Sofia suggested one day. Register as a business consultant. You're already doing the work. You might as well get proper credit for it. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I registered my own consulting company, Herrera Business Solutions, using my maiden name. I opened a separate bank account, got business cards printed, and started operating as an independent consultant. I was careful to keep my consulting work separate from Marco's business. I never used his resources, never worked during his company's hours, and never took clients who might compete with his import business. I told myself I was just helping people in my spare time, earning a little pocket money for myself. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. For the first time in 15 years, I was building something that was truly mine, something that Marco couldn't take away from me, something that proved my worth beyond his dismissive attitude. The business grew faster than I'd ever imagined. Within 18 months, I had over 30 regular clients across Spain. I was helping family businesses expand internationally, assisting startups with their financial planning, and even working with some larger companies on organizational restructuring. My biggest success came when I helped a small winery in Rioja expand into the European market. The owner, Carlos Mendoza, had been struggling to compete with larger producers when he hired me to review his operations. "Isabella," he said during our first meeting, "I make the best wine in the region, but I can't seem to turn a profit. I'm one bad season away from losing everything my family built." I spent weeks analyzing his business, identifying inefficiencies, and developing a comprehensive growth strategy. I helped him streamline production, improve quality control, and most importantly, I used my connections from Marco's business to introduce him to distributors across Europe. Within a year, Carlos's winery had secured distribution deals in France, Germany, and the Netherlands. His profits increased by 400%, and he was able to expand his operations and hire additional staff. "I owe you everything," Carlos told me, handing me a check for 50,000 euros as a success bonus. "You saved my family's legacy." That's when I realized what I'd built wasn't just a side business. It was a legitimate, profitable company that was making a real difference in people's lives. And more importantly, it was proof that I was far more than just Marco's helpful wife. Kept the business secret from Marco, though I'm not sure why. Maybe I was afraid he'd try to claim credit for it, or maybe I just wanted something that was entirely mine. Either way, I continued to work quietly, building my reputation and my bank account while Marco remained oblivious to what I was doing. The final piece of the puzzle came when I hired Elena Vasquez, a brilliant young accountant who helped me structure my business more efficiently. Elena was the one who suggested I could save significant money on taxes by reinvesting my profits back into the business. "You're sitting on a gold mine, Isabella," Elena told me one afternoon as we reviewed my financial statements. "You have the capital to expand significantly. You could hire additional consultants, take on larger projects, maybe even acquire some of your client businesses." That's exactly what I did. I used my consulting profits to acquire a 60% stake in 3 of my most successful client companies: Sophia's organic food company, Carlos's winery, and a small tech startup that I'd helped develop an e-commerce platform for food distributors. By the time Marco served me with divorce papers, I owned a consulting business worth over 600,000 euros, plus stakes in 3 other companies valued at another 300,000 euros. My total net worth was nearly 900,000 euros, more than the value of Marco's import business. The beautiful irony was that I'd built this empire using the exact same skills that Marco had dismissed as mere contributions to his business. Every strategy I'd developed, every organizational system I'd created, every relationship I'd built, it all proved that I was a formidable businesswoman in my own right. But I'd kept it secret, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. That moment was now. "Your Honor," Carmen continued, presenting a thick folder of documents, "Mrs. Herrera has been operating a successful business consulting firm for the past 2 years. She has over 30 active clients, owns stakes in multiple companies, and has generated nearly 900,000 euros in personal wealth, all completely separate from her husband's business." The courtroom was dead silent. Marco looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. His lawyer was staring at the documents in disbelief. "Furthermore," Carmen added, "Mrs. Herrera's business success demonstrates that her contributions to her husband's company weren't just those of a supportive spouse, but those of a skilled business professional. Her independent success proves that she possessed the expertise and capabilities that made Mr. Valdez's business possible." Judge Rodriguez studied the documents carefully. "Mrs. Herrera, you built this business while married to Mr. Valdez?" I stood up, my voice steady and clear. "Yes, Your Honor. I used the skills I developed during my 15 years of working on my husband's business to help other entrepreneurs succeed. I did this work in my spare time, using my own resources, completely separate from my husband's company. And Mr. Valdez was unaware of this business? Completely unaware, Your Honor. While he was dismissing my contributions to his business as unimportant, I was proving my worth by helping dozens of other companies grow and succeed. Marco finally found his voice. "This is impossible," he shouted, jumping to his feet. "She couldn't have built a business without my knowledge. She's been using my resources, my contacts, my—" "Mr. Valdez," Judge Rodriguez interrupted firmly, "please sit down. Mrs. Herrera, can you provide documentation that this business was built independently of your husband's resources?" Carmen was ready with another stack of documents. "Your Honor, we have complete financial records showing that Mrs. Herrera's business was funded entirely from her personal savings and reinvested profits. She maintained separate bank accounts, used her own equipment, and worked from rented office space. Additionally, we have sworn statements from her clients confirming that she never represented herself as associated with her husband's import business." I watched Marco's face as the full implications sank in. Not only was his prenup invalid, not only had I documented my crucial role in building his business, but I'd also built my own successful company that rivaled his in value. "There's more, Your Honor," Carmen continued, and I saw Marco's eyes widen with fear. "Mrs. Herrera's business success has attracted the attention of several major corporations. She has received 3 acquisition offers in the past 6 months, the highest of which values her company at 1.2 million euros. Marco's lawyer was frantically whispering to his client, but Marco seemed to be in shock. His carefully constructed plan to leave me with nothing was crumbling before his eyes. "Your Honor," Carmen said, building to her conclusion, "Mrs. Herrera doesn't need half of her husband's business. She's built something even more valuable on her own. However, the evidence clearly shows that she earned half of the marital assets through her 15 years of unpaid labor that made Mr. Valdez's success possible." Judge Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to review these documents more carefully. We'll take a 30-minute recess." As the judge left the courtroom, Marco finally looked at me directly for the first time all day. His expression was a mixture of shock, anger, and something that looked almost like respect. "How?" he asked quietly. "How did you do this without me knowing?" I met his gaze steadily. "The same way I built your business, Marco, through hard work, intelligence, and dedication. The only difference is that this time, I made sure my name was on the papers." During the recess, I could hear Marco arguing desperately with his lawyer in the hallway. He was starting to realize that not only would he lose half of his business, but he'd also be facing a divorce from a woman who was now independently wealthy. "She played me," I heard him say, his voice filled with disbelief. "She's been planning this for years." But that wasn't true. I hadn't been planning anything. I'd simply been working, building, and succeeding. The same things I'd been doing for 15 years. The only difference was that this time, I'd made sure to protect myself legally. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Rodriguez had made his decision. After reviewing all the evidence presented today, he began, "I find that the prenuptial agreement between Mr. Valdez and Mrs. Herrera is invalid due to improper execution and filing. Therefore, all marital assets are subject to equitable distribution." Marco's shoulders sagged with defeat. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the evidence clearly demonstrates that Mrs. Herrera played an integral role in building the business that Mr. Valdez claims as his sole achievement. Her independent business success proves that she possessed the professional skills and expertise necessary to make significant contributions to the marital enterprise." Judge Rodriguez looked directly at Marco. "Mr. Valdez, your recorded statements about receiving 15 years of free labor from your wife are particularly troubling. They suggest a deliberate pattern of exploitation and undervaluation of your spouse's contributions. Therefore," he continued, "I hereby award Mrs. Herrera 50% of all marital assets, including but not limited to 50% ownership of Valdez Import Company, 50% of the marital home, 50% of all business accounts and investments, and 50% of the business equipment and inventory." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Marco's heavy breathing. "Additionally," Judge Rodriguez added, "Mrs. Herrera's separate business and personal accounts, totaling approximately 900,000 euros, shall remain entirely her own property, as they were acquired through her independent efforts during the marriage. I felt tears of relief streaming down my face, but I kept my composure. This was my moment of vindication, the moment when 15 years of dismissed contributions were finally recognized. "Mr. Valdez," the judge said firmly, "you will also be responsible for Mrs. Herrera's legal fees, as this case required extensive litigation due to your attempts to deny her rightful share of the marital assets." Carmen squeezed my hand under the table. We'd done it. We'd won. But Judge Rodriguez wasn't finished. "Mrs. Herrera," he said, turning to me, "given your demonstrated business acumen and the success of your independent company, the court awards you the option to either accept 50% ownership of the import business or receive equivalent compensation in cash and other assets, allowing you to maintain your separate business interests without conflict." I stood up, my voice clear and strong. "Your Honor, I choose the cash compensation. I have no interest in remaining connected to Mr. Valdez's business. I prefer to focus on my own company and my own future." The final tally was staggering. Between my own business assets and my share of the marital property, I was walking away from this divorce with over 1.6 million euros and complete control of my own successful company. Marco, meanwhile, would have to liquidate significant portions of his business to pay me my share. The empire he'd thought he was protecting would be severely damaged by the very divorce he'd initiated. As we gathered our papers and prepared to leave the courtroom, Marco approached me one last time. "Isabella," he said quietly, "I underestimated you. I underestimated you completely." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. Gone was the arrogant, dismissive man who'd left me that cruel note on the kitchen counter. In his place was someone who finally understood what he'd lost. "No, Marco," I replied calmly, "you underestimated my worth." But I never did. I always knew what I was capable of. I just needed to prove it to myself. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt like a completely different person than the broken, defeated woman who'd found divorce papers on her kitchen counter 6 months earlier. I was no longer Isabella Valdez, the dismissed wife who'd given up everything for a man who didn't value her. I was Isabella Herrera, successful business owner, independent woman, and someone who'd finally learned to recognize her own worth. The story of my divorce spread quickly through Madrid's business community. Other women reached out to me, sharing their own stories of being undervalued and dismissed. Many of them became clients, seeking help building their own independent businesses. Marco's import company never fully recovered from the financial hit of our divorce. Within 2 years, he'd sold it to a larger competitor and moved to South America, presumably to start over. I heard through mutual friends that he'd learned to treat people with more respect, though I never had any contact with him again. My consulting business, on the other hand, continued to thrive. I expanded internationally, hired a team of talented consultants, and eventually sold the company for 3.2 million euros to focus on my investment portfolio and philanthropic work. I established a foundation that provides business mentoring and financial support to women entrepreneurs, particularly those escaping difficult marriages or rebuilding their lives after divorce. Every year, we help hundreds of women discover their own worth and build their own success stories. The most satisfying part isn't the money or the recognition. It's the knowledge that I proved something important that day in court. I proved that dismissing someone's contributions doesn't make them less valuable. I proved that underestimating someone's potential doesn't limit their ability to succeed. And I proved that sometimes the person who laughs last is the person who was quietly building their own empire while everyone else was underestimating them. Marco thought he was getting 15 years of free labor from a woman who would walk away with nothing. Instead, he'd unknowingly helped train a formidable businesswoman who would go on to build something far more valuable than what he'd tried to keep from her. That's the real lesson of this story. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. When someone dismisses your worth, prove them wrong. And when someone laughs while trying to take everything from you, remember that the best revenge is building something they could never have imagined. The sound of Marco's confident laughter as he signed those divorce papers will always stay with me. But so will the sound of his stunned silence when he realized that the woman he'd underestimated for 15 years had quietly become someone he could never have defeated. In the end, I didn't just win the divorce. I won my life back, my confidence back, and my future back. And that victory was worth more than any amount of money the judge could have awarded me. Justice, it turns out, doesn't always come with fanfare and dramatic speeches. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of a bank balance that shocks the person who thought they held all the cards. Sometimes it comes in the form of a woman who refused to accept being dismissed, who built her own empire while her husband wasn't looking, and who proved that the most dangerous opponent is the one you underestimate. Marco learned that lesson the hard way. I hope he never forgets it. The end.